It is The Rob from 106.1 KISS FM here with my tag team partner in podcasting. Good morning, Mr. Jerry Valeri.
Rob, how are you, my brother?
Man, I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Good weekend. My voice feels a little weak because I spent the whole time screaming at my kids, but we'll get through it today.
Thank you for being a part of the podcast with us today. This is a rare Monday episode. Usually a Monday episode, we're covering a pay-per-view, recapping a pay-per-view, and today we're not doing that. Today we're going to be, actually, I guess next Monday we'll be talking about SummerSlam, which I'm excited for. But today we're going to talk about the Dean Ambrose appearance on the Stone Cold podcast.
Right. It all started with you texting me. I'm so far behind on the podcast. I haven't really caught them because I don't enjoy Austin as much as other people do as an interviewer, not as a wrestler. I loved Stone Cold. But so I wasn't going to watch it. And you were like, you need to see it. It's very weird. From a broadcaster's perspective, it's one of those train wreck interviews that we've all experienced. And I wasn't sure how far I was going to have to go into the podcast before I got to where you were. It was 30 seconds. It took 30 seconds. And I was like, whoa, what's wrong with Dean Ambrose? Okay,
so here's what happened. When I can't watch the podcast live, neither can you. We both get up really early. But I appreciate the Stone Cold podcast for what they are. I will pick and choose which one of his audio podcasts I will listen to because I don't think his show is great from just like a listener standpoint. If he's talking to a wrestler, I'm usually interested in what he has to say, and I do think his wrestling interviews are pretty good. If you listen to his other podcasts, the ones that aren't on the network, he'll oftentimes go into like hunting, and I'll go into like keeping up the Stone Cold Rancher with the BSR, Broken Skull, whatever he calls it. And he's super annoying to me if he's not talking about wrestling. But if he is talking about wrestling, generally I appreciate him.
Yeah, I like the answers he sometimes gets from people. His interviews, for me, they live or die on the person he's interviewing.
Correct.
And I thought the Dean Ambrose one would be good, but Dean Ambrose seemed high, or just aloof, like too cool for school. Like I couldn't handle it.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. So they did not mix well, and their results were not very positive. So I watched the podcast, and I want to know if Jerry had seen it. And since I had seen it, someone even came up to me at work and asked me if I had watched it, and he thought it was like, what, did they have heat? And I was like, I think that they might have, because it was super duper weird.
Well, if they didn't at the beginning, they did by the end. To be fair to Ambrose, when he was trying to give Stone Cold anything, if it wasn't exactly what Stone Cold wanted, Stone Cold wouldn't budge.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is a bad interviewer right there. I mean, he brought up, he clearly wanted to get to public housing. And the fact that Dean Ambrose grew up in public housing and he had a rough time in Cincinnati. And he said, so you grew up in the mean streets of Cincinnati. Tell us about that. And Dean decided, probably because he didn't want to talk about that, I'll name some other people who are from Cincinnati. He was like, well, Jerry Springer's from Cincinnati too. And then they start going in a funnier direction. And Austin wouldn't budge. He refused to move on to his next question without getting an answer on his first question, which sometimes could be seen as like being a hardball interview, but in a conversational setting like a podcast, you need to be able to just roll with it.
Yeah. Okay. So I agree in that I feel like it was a combination of a bad host and a bad guest. So when you talk about that Cincinnati example and the public housing thing, I do feel like Austin he got stuck there because he didn't get the answer he was expecting. And oftentimes the sign of a bad interviewer is someone who's not listening to what's actually happening. Someone who's just got a whole list of questions bullet pointed out, and he wants to go in that order. And Austin clearly had a direction he wanted to go in, and Ambrose would sometimes swerve him off that, which is supposed to happen in a conversation. Not even in an interview, just in a conversation that happens.
You're absolutely right. He failed to pick up on anything interesting. There could be in an interview, there are times where I'll have some ideas or an outline. I don't write out hard questions when I'm talking to somebody.
Right.
But there are certain directions I want to go, places I would like to see myself get to. But if they go somewhere else and it's interesting, you don't force them into your spot. You just go with it.
Right.
And that's exactly what you said. I mean, he doesn't listen to your response. He just waits to hear you not talk anymore, and then he goes to his next question. And maybe he'll get better. I don't know. I mean, that's a rookie thing. It's a rookie move. We've all done it.
Austin will tell you this is not like his forte. He considers himself a wrestler first before he considers himself a broadcaster. But he also falls into this pitfall of what I call like Wikipedia interviewers, like people who will do their research on Wikipedia, assume that everything's right, and then present it to the guest. And sometimes that information is not going to be right. And I've heard other people fall into this trap too when they're interviewing somebody and the information is either wrong or Dean is denying it. Like, for example, the public housing thing that you brought up is a great example where Austin had this information in front of him that Dean grew up in public housing. And I don't know what Dean's upbringing was like, but Dean is denying it over and over and over again. Rightly or wrongly, he's denying it. And Austin is stuck in it. He's just stuck in it and wants Dean to like admit something that wasn't there.
He's hammering the public housing, yet you fast forward 30 minutes, and Dean Ambrose gives Stone Cold an unexpected beauty when he says that he was met with laziness planning for the WrestleMania match with Brock Lesnar.
What a great nugget that was.
That was so good. And then Austin just blows right by it.
Yeah, that's where you want to spend the time.
Press him there.
Yeah.
Because Dean wanted to say more. And Austin blew it. And I don't know if he blew it because he's friends with Brock or if he blew it because he had another question that was on his list. But he blew it.
Because Austin wants to go question by question. He shouldn't. Yeah.
The one part of that whole podcast that I enjoyed was that. And that lasted like 10 seconds.
So there were a few other things I wanted to hit before the big bombshell at the end that everyone's talking about. Because there was one major thing that happened. But like when Dean was in school, there was a part where Austin was kind of pressing him about what kind of trouble he got into. And it just seemed like if Dean was making it very clear without saying it at first, I don't really want to talk about the trouble I got into. He was making it pretty clear. It seemed to me like he was doing drugs as a kid and just didn't really want to come out and say it because he's got his bosses in the next room or whatever. And, you know, he's supposed to be an example to kids or whatever. But Austin's kind of like pressing him and did not pick up those cues like, hey, Dean doesn't really want to go here. I need to move forward.
Dean's the WWE champion. You can't have the WWE champion in the PG era come out and be like, yeah, I did a ton of drugs as a kid. He was like, he wanted to get around it. You're right.
Yeah. And but it was obvious to me as a viewer that he didn't want to do it.
Do you think Austin had that bombshell at the end planned the whole time? Do you think he was going to blow Dean Ambrose up at the end no matter what, or he was so frustrated with the interview that he decided to tell me he's resting on his laurels?
No, okay, but actually, if I could, can I let's build to that because I have another point I wanted to get to with before we get to Brock, because there was a time where I don't remember exactly what the question was, but Dean just felt like he was asleep to me. Oh yeah, it was when he talked about getting signed by the WWE for the first time. Yeah. And Austin said something like, man, is there anything that can get you excited? Like, as in, you are asleep on my podcast and I need you to wake up. And I'm on Team Austin on this one because Dean was giving him nothing to work with, man. It was so boring about stuff that should have been exciting, stuff that should have lit his face up. Austin could not get a drop of juice out of Dean.
Yeah, it's not all Austin's fault. And I think Austin did as good a job as you could do. I don't know what I'd have done with Dean at that point. I would have bailed on that interview. That was not going well. And when you figure this is a guy who's kind of associated with being a good talker in the modern day scope, like he's regarded as being a pretty good interview, pretty good on the stick. I mean, you would never have thought that based on this podcast. I don't know what he was doing in there. This podcast, I felt by the end of it, made him seem more unintelligent, and definitely more unlikable.
Absolutely. And guys like you and me, the serious fans, like we're the target audience for this podcast. And I think that people go in there with the mentality of they're going to appeal to people like us, and they missed that mark. It was a train wreck in that respect.
Right.
So, all right, let's move on to the big thing, which was, well, we hit the Brock Lesnar thing, and then came the challenge.
Yeah, you're resting on your laurels, Rob. You're resting on your laurels.
Okay, well, that was the thing. So let's talk about this, because this got things super awkward and ended on a weird note. To me, the real podcast would have been what happened after the podcast ended, because I really want to know, because it got uncomfortable at the end. Now let's talk about this. So if you missed it, at the end of the podcast, Stone Cold, he kind of got a little visibly uncomfortable. I think he kind of realized he was having kind of a weak podcast, and he said to Dean, in not so many words, "You're capable of more," using the term "you're resting on your laurels." Yep. And you can tell that visibly upset Dean, and rightfully so. Now,
and Dean even said at one point, he said, I'm offended by this.
Correct. And I think that I'm going to use the word rude. I think it was a little bit rude of Austin. However, as a viewer, I appreciated it. What do you think about that?
Well, I thought it was rude as well. But when I texted you that, you had the perfect response. You said, it's also rude to go onto someone's podcast and be asleep the whole time.
I do. I believe that.
I think they were both rude. I thought it was rude, but it makes sense. It's not something I think you tell someone on a podcast that the entire WWE universe can see. That's a backstage advice thing, because I think Dean actually has been. There's no zip to his moves. I think he's great. I still think he's good, and I think he deserves the pops that he gets. But I don't know. He definitely was more electric like a year ago.
Yeah. So he's
not as much anymore.
Here's what I take from this. So every time we review a Dean Ambrose match in depth, which is usually only after a pay-per-view, I've kind of stopped saying it, because I feel like my critiques are the same with him, but I believe it so passionately, and I'm reminded of it every time I see the guy wrestle. He used to be so much better, and I'll explain why. For starters, he was a guy, and think like end of the Shield, beginning of the post-Shield. Anytime Dean Ambrose picked up a mic, you were glued to the TV, because he had something really significant, something exciting to say. It was like when Austin or Rock picked up a mic in the late 90s in the Attitude Era. He had that going on. Very few guys have that right now. There are some, but there's very few guys who, in that 2 years ago, I'm talking about, or a year ago, when Dean picked up a mic, I'm talking like when he had the slime shooting out of Seth Rollins' briefcase kind of stuff. Like that was who he's supposed to be. We know he's the lunatic fringe because the shirts say it, because the announcers remind us. He stopped acting like that. And then
I don't think he actually likes that character. He said something in the podcast where, like, well, I'm just me, and whatever marketing tells you, this lunatic or whatever, but I'm just, so I don't even know if he's buying into that as much anymore. And that might be creatively why he's changing it himself. I noticed one thing. There was one theme the whole way through when he did give an answer. Is Dean Ambrose has been and will always be motivated by spite. He is motivated by the people that detract from him. He is motivated by the people that say he cannot do things. That's when he steps it up. Well, I certainly am.
Yeah, me too.
But he was offended by Steve Austin. And I wonder if he's going to come out pissed, and he's going to come out at SummerSlam, and he's going to put on the Dean Ambrose we've wanted to see for a while.
Well, okay, and then in the ring, there's a few things he can do. It's like the big example to me, and I hate using the same ones over and over again that I've used on this podcast, and I don't think we've gotten your thoughts on this on the air yet, but to me, when he hits his signature moves, which are cool and exciting and different, like when he bounces off the ropes and does the little kind of 619 move through him, or like when he bounces off the turnbuckle and kind of reverberates back, and like he used to do it with so much veracity and so ferociously, and now I feel like it's in slow motion. Strangely, what is that?
He's doing it underwater now, and it's so predictable that everyone should see it coming, because I can see it coming.
I did not need Steve Austin to point out to me, but I'm glad he did, that I really feel like Dean Ambrose is living up to 10% of his potential.
Do you think that podcast could hurt him? Do you think that could have changed the way that they book SummerSlam? Do you think like Vince would watch that and go, you know what? Take the belt off him?
No, I don't think it would be that severe, but I do think it could, what you say, motivate Dean. I think that he was offended by that. And I think that it was the most poignant part of the interview. And I don't think people disagree with him. So, I mean, could it charge up Dean? Yes. Could it rebook SummerSlam? I doubt it.
And have we seen anything from Brock? Has Brock said anything about what Dean Ambrose said? I
really don't think Brock cares. I was listening to JR's podcast this week, which is okay. I pick and choose those two. And he was talking about UFC 200 before the match happened. And some interviewer for MMA asked him, if you lose to Mark Hunt, are you worried about what this could do for for booking you in WWE? And Brock's response was, in part of my language, I don't give a shit, was what Brock said about that. I don't really think Brock would be affected by that. I really don't. And also, I believe what Dean had to say about that, because that makes total sense about why that WrestleMania match sucked.
Yeah, that match was lackluster, and I think Dean wanted to do more with it.
Of course. So. I mean, look at the way they booked that match, and the everything leading up to that match was how this is going to be some hardcore fans' wet dream. And all the weapons, the focus of the buildup was easily on the props and the weapons. And they made such a small indent on that match. It was frustrating. The whole WrestleMania was frustrating, but that was a great example as to why it was. I mean, to me, the most frustrating was still Shane and Undertaker.
Right.
Which we're still feeling the effects of that. But okay, so it seems like we both came from the same place. If anybody disagrees with us, I am dying to hear someone say something flattering about that. That was an example of an interview that did both those guys an injustice, because I think that Austin and Ambrose came out looking worse from that podcast than before they went in.
Right. Dean was a terrible guest, but I will go out and I will say, and feel free to attack me. I'm excited for that. No one has done it yet. Steve Austin, as a broadcaster, Steve Austin having a podcast offends me.
Well, as someone who listens from time to time, there's definitely areas of improvement. I do not like when he's talking about anything besides wrestling, but when he's not on camera and he's just on mic, I appreciate him talking about wrestling. But that's all I want to hear him talking about. So he's got some room for improvement, as we all do. I could be better. You know, I don't know if you feel that way about yourself, but there's always room for improvement, you know? There you go. Exactly. We've got a lot coming up, because this is going to be a busy week for us. I guess let's chat again tomorrow. We'll chat about Raw, and then we'll need to record our predictions for SummerSlam.
Right, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm locked and unlocked on a lot of things. So
I can't keep it straight which ones you've locked in on and which ones you've unlocked on.
Me either. I've got to go back and watch the podcast and figure it out, and then we'll be good.
All right. Well, then for myself, the Rob, and my tag team partner, the one and only Jerry Valeri, we are the perfect interviewers, the tag team partners in podcasting, and we'll be back again tomorrow reviewing Raw with Post to Post. Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you, Rob.